July 28, 1982. A 7-year-old girl walked onto the Tonight Show stage in front of 20 million viewers. She was wearing a little white dress, her hair perfectly styled, her smile absolutely perfect. Too perfect. And then she slipped. Her feet went out from under her and she sprawled across the studio floor in front of America. Johnny Carson stood up immediately, walked over to help her, ever the gentleman. The audience gasped, then laughed nervously. But the little girl just giggled, blamed her slippery shoes, and bounced right back up. That was everyone's first clue. This wasn't going to be a normal interview, because 90 seconds later, this same 7-year-old would do something so unexpected, so perfectly childlike and hilarious, that Johnny Carson would freeze mid-sentence. His famous composure would crack, and 20 million people watching at home would witness one of the most iconic moments in Tonight Show history. The moment Drew Barrymore pulled out her teeth on live television and placed them on Johnny Carson's desk. This is the story of the interview that proved Drew Barrymore was born to be a star. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Drew Barrymore was in 1982, and more importantly, who she was supposed to be. Drew came from Hollywood royalty. Her grandfather was John Barrymore, one of the greatest actors of the early 20th century. Her father, John Drew Barrymore, had been an actor. Her mother, Jade Barrymore, was trying desperately to revive the family legacy through her daughter. And in the summer of 1982, that plan was working. Drew had just starred in the biggest movie of the year, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Steven Spielberg's science fiction masterpiece about a boy who befriends an alien. Drew played Gertie, the little sister. She was only 6 years old when they filmed it, and her performance was magic. Not the trained, rehearsed kind of child acting. Real magic. The kind where a kid forgets the cameras exist and just becomes the character. Audiences fell in love with her instantly. By July 1982, E.T. was breaking box office records. It would eventually become one of the highest-grossing films in history. And Drew Barrymore, at 7 years old, was suddenly one of the most famous children in America. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was the biggest platform in television. If you got invited to sit on Johnny's couch, it meant you'd made it. For adults, it was career-defining. For a 7-year-old, it was almost unprecedented. Child actors occasionally appeared on talk shows, but they were usually brought out for a quick hello, a cute moment, then shuffled off. Johnny Carson was not known for long interviews with children. He was witty, sharp, sometimes sarcastic. His humor was sophisticated, but his producers knew that Drew Barrymore was different. This wasn't just another child actor. This was the star of the summer's biggest movie. And more than that, this was a kid who, even at 7 years old, had personality. Steven Spielberg had seen it during auditions, when every other child actor tried to perform and impress. Drew had just been herself. Chaotic, funny, unfiltered. She'd told Spielberg she could cry on command and then burst into tears to prove it. She'd screamed at the top of her lungs when he asked her to show fear. She had no filter, no sense of what she was supposed to do. She just did whatever felt right. That's what made her Gertie. And that's what made her perfect for The Tonight Show. Because Johnny Carson's best moments always came when something unexpected happened, when a guest went off script, when the carefully planned interview fell apart and real, genuine moments took over. Drew Barrymore's entire existence was off script. July 28, 1982, 11:30 p.m. Pacific Time. The Tonight Show was taping in NBC's Burbank studios. Johnny had already done his monologue. His first guest was Joan Collins, the star of Dynasty, one of the biggest TV shows in America. Glamorous, sophisticated, exactly the kind of guest Johnny handled effortlessly. But now it was time for Drew Barrymore. Backstage, Drew was vibrating with excitement. She'd told everyone who would listen that she'd been waiting her whole life to meet Johnny Carson. Her whole life. All 7 years of it. Her mother, Jad, was fussing over her, making sure her dress was perfect, making sure her hair looked right, and making sure Drew was wearing her flippers, the fake teeth. See, Drew was 7 years old, which meant she was losing her baby teeth. Her front teeth were growing in, but there were gaps. And in Hollywood, even child actors had to look perfect on television, so Drew's team had made her a set of fake teeth. Flippers, they called them, little dentures that snapped over her real teeth to give her a complete camera-ready smile. Drew hated them. They were uncomfortable. They made her talk funny. They felt weird in her mouth, but her mother insisted, "You're going on national television, Drew. You need to look your best." So Drew wore them, for now. Ed McMahon's voice boomed through the studio. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the star of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Please welcome Drew Barrymore. The band played, the audience applauded. The curtain opened, and 7-year-old Drew Barrymore, in her little white dress and patent leather shoes, walked out onto the stage. Except she didn't just walk. She slipped. Her shoes, too slippery on the polished floor, went right out from under her. Drew Barrymore's first moment on The Tonight Show was sprawling face first across Johnny Carson's stage in front of 20 million people. The audience gasped. Johnny stood up from behind his desk, walked over to her. "Drew, are you okay?" But Drew was already laughing. She popped right back up, completely unfazed. "I'm okay. It's these slippery shoes." The audience exhaled, then started laughing with her. Johnny smiled, took her hand, and walked her over to the couch. "That's all right," he said in that smooth Johnny Carson voice. "Plenty of grown-ups have slipped on this stage before. You're in good company." He sat her down on the famous Tonight Show couch. Drew looked tiny next to him. Her feet barely touched the floor. Her eyes were wide with excitement, and then she said the line that would start everything. "I've been waiting all my life to meet you. It's a miracle." Johnny Carson, who had interviewed presidents and movie stars and legends who never broke his cool composure, couldn't help but grin. "Your whole life? All 7 years?" Drew nodded seriously. "Yes. I stay up late just to watch your show, because of you." The audience melted. This wasn't a trained performance. This was genuine. Drew Barrymore really was starstruck, really was thrilled to be sitting next to Johnny Carson. And Johnny, who could be cold and distant with some guests who sometimes seemed bored by interviews, was charmed. "You do know this show is on past your bedtime, right?" "Yeah," Drew said, giggling. "But I stay up anyway. My mom talks on the phone a lot, so I just watch TV." Johnny glanced at the camera, gave his trademark look. The audience laughed. Jade Barrymore, watching from backstage, probably cringed. But Johnny moved on. He asked Drew about the movie, about working with Steven Spielberg, who Drew kept calling Steven, like they were old friends, about what it was like to act scared of an alien that wasn't really there. Drew launched into an explanation of how she had to scream really loud, like really loud. She demonstrated, letting out a shriek that made Johnny lean back in his chair, and the audience burst into laughter. She talked about how she had to cry in some scenes and how she could do it whenever she wanted. "You want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, Drew's face crumpled and tears started forming in her eyes. Johnny held up his hands. "No, that's okay. I believe you." Drew instantly brightened up, the tears gone as fast as they'd appeared. The audience applauded. This kid was a natural. Then Johnny said something that changed everything. "You have a very pretty smile, Drew. You have very pretty teeth." Drew's face shifted. She looked at Johnny with sudden seriousness. "You know, tell me if you notice this. It would be kind of easier to talk without my teeth." Johnny Carson paused. "What are you talking about?" And then, before anyone could stop her, before her mother could run out from backstage, before Johnny Carson could process what was happening, 7-year-old Drew Barrymore reached into her mouth and pulled out her flippers, the fake teeth, the Hollywood perfect smile. She pulled them right out of her mouth and placed them on Johnny Carson's desk. On live television, in front of 20 million people. The studio went completely silent for exactly 1 second, and then erupted. The audience exploded in laughter and applause. Johnny Carson's mouth dropped open. He stared at the teeth sitting on his desk, then at Drew, who was now grinning with her real gap-toothed 7-year-old smile, and his famous composure completely shattered. He started laughing. That genuine, can't control it, didn't see it coming. Johnny Carson laughed that only came out when something truly surprised him. "Let me see those now," he managed to say, still laughing. "Give me a smile." Drew smiled wide, showing the gaps where her front teeth were still growing in. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Because this wasn't cute. This wasn't rehearsed. This was a 7-year-old being completely, authentically herself on national television, breaking every rule of Hollywood phoniness and just being real. Johnny picked up the fake teeth, examined them like they were the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "So you wear these when you do television?" "Yeah," Drew said matter-of-factly. "My front teeth all lined up now, but they gave me these." She paused, then delivered the line that would become legendary. "Yeah, but they kill." The audience roared again. Johnny was wiping tears from his eyes. "They kill? They hurt?" "Yeah, they're so uncomfortable," Drew said with the dramatic emphasis only a 7-year-old could pull off. "I hate wearing them." Johnny glanced backstage, probably at Drew Barrymore. "Your mother knows you just took those out, right?" Drew's eyes got wide. "Oh no, she's gonna kill me. I lost them the other day and she was so mad." The audience was howling now. Johnny held up the fake teeth. "Well, don't forget them when you leave." Drew nodded seriously. "My mom would kill me if I left them here. She was about to when I lost them the other day." The way she said it, completely sincere, had Johnny cracking up again. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was just a conversation with a hilarious 7-year-old who had no idea how funny she was, and that's what made it perfect. But here's what made that moment truly iconic. It wasn't just funny. It was real. In 1982, child actors were products. They were managed, controlled, made to seem perfect. Their teeth were fixed. Their hair was styled. They said what they were told to say, smiled when they were told to smile. Drew Barrymore pulling out her fake teeth on live television was an act of pure, unfiltered honesty. It was a 7-year-old saying, "This is fake. This is uncomfortable. This isn't really me. And I don't care if I'm supposed to wear it, I'm taking it off." Johnny Carson recognized that immediately. That's why he laughed so hard. Because in a business built on phoniness, on maintaining images and playing roles, this little girl had just cut through all of it. She wasn't performing. She was just being Drew. The interview continued for another few minutes. Drew talked about her dentist, who she had a crush on. She talked about her friends, other kids named Drew. She accidentally revealed that Steven Spielberg was planning an E.T. sequel, making Johnny joke that he'd keep it just between them. And through it all, Drew sat there with her gap-toothed smile, completely at ease, completely herself. When the segment ended and they went to commercial, Johnny stood up and shook Drew's hand like she was a fellow professional. "You're going to be a star, kid, you really are." Drew beamed at him. "Can I come back?" "Anytime," Johnny said, and he meant it. The next day, Drew Barrymore's Tonight Show appearance was all anyone could talk about. Clips played on news shows. Entertainment reporters called it one of the best celebrity interviews of the year. And Drew Barrymore? She became more than just the kid from E.T. She became Drew Barrymore, the personality, the unfiltered, genuine, hilarious presence who would spend the next 40 years being exactly that. That Tonight Show appearance established something crucial. Drew Barrymore didn't play by Hollywood's rules. She was going to be herself, teeth or no teeth, and America loved her for it. Of course, Drew's life would get complicated after that. By age 9, she was going to clubs with her mother. By 10, she was drinking. By 13, she was in rehab. The lack of boundaries, the Hollywood lifestyle, the pressure of being famous so young all caught up with her. But even through the struggles, even through the rehab and the headlines and the chaos, Drew never lost that core thing, that authenticity, that willingness to be real when everyone else was fake. And it all started on July 28, 1982, with a slip, a smile, and a pair of fake teeth placed on Johnny Carson's desk. Years later, in 2022, Drew Barrymore posted the clip on her Instagram. She was 47 years old by then, a successful actress, producer, and host of her own talk show. She watched that 7-year-old version of herself take out those teeth and laughed. The caption read, "Some things never change." She was right. 40 years later, Drew Barrymore was still the person who'd say what everyone was thinking, who'd break the rules everyone else followed, who'd choose authenticity over perfection every single time. That's what that Tonight Show appearance proved. Not that Drew Barrymore was cute, though she was. Not that she was funny, though she definitely was. But that she was real. And in Hollywood, real is the rarest thing of all. Johnny Carson understood that instantly. That's why he laughed so hard. That's why he told her she'd be a star. because he recognized something special, not just talent, not just charisma, but the courage to be yourself when the whole world is watching. Even at 7 years old, especially at 7 years old. The fake teeth sat on Johnny's desk for the rest of the interview. A physical reminder that sometimes the best moments in television come when someone stops performing and just exists. When a 7-year-old decides that being comfortable matters more than looking perfect. When authenticity wins over image. Drew Barrymore took out her teeth. Johnny Carson collapsed into laughter, and 20 million people fell in love with a little girl who dared to be real. That's the story. That's the moment. That's why, 40 years later, we're still talking about the night Drew Barrymore shocked Johnny Carson. If this story of authenticity, courage, and a 7-year-old who broke all the rules made you smile, you need to hear what happened next. Because Drew Barrymore wasn't the only person who made Johnny Carson lose control. There was a little boy who asked Johnny how to make money disappear, and Carson's answer made history. That story is coming next. But first, hit that subscribe button, because we're diving deep into the moments that made The Tonight Show legendary.